At dawn on 23rd October, Dar es Salaam woke to a paradox. The city was loud. The internet was silent. Within minutes, over 90% of traffic disappeared, cutting Tanzania off from its own conversation at the most delicate hour of an election. The government called it a technical fault. Voters called it what it felt like, a blackout by design. Elections are the moment a nation speaks. Cutting the network then is not neutral. It is procedural, muting away to delete witnesses in real time. Videos that did slip through before the choke point showed polling stations bracing under tension, long queues, and rumors outrunning verification. With the feeds gone, so was the oxygen of accountability. From an analytical standpoint, the pattern is familiar across the continent. Power intervenes not where votes are cast, but where votes are seen. Control the bandwidth, and you control what becomes history. In that sense, the outage was not a glitch of cables, but a calculation of consequences. My view is blunt. An election without connectivity is an election without memory. It pushes citizens back into rumor economies, privileges those who command state media, and turns the referee into a player. The claim of technical issues may satisfy a press release. It does not satisfy a democracy. What happened on the 23rd of October was more than a service disruption. It was the opening move in a struggle over who owns the public record, the state or the citizens it serves. And Tanzania's day of silence made one thing deafeningly clear in the digital age. Internet access is not a luxury. It is part of the ballot. When the network fell, the streets rose. By mid-morning, protests erupted across Dar es Salaam, first in small clusters, then in waves. The neighborhoods of Kimar and Kinondoni became flashpoints, their polling stations surrounded not by lines of voters, but by lines of riot police. The videos that managed to escape the blackout showed a sequence that has become tragically recognizable across the continent. Shoved voters, truncheons, swinging tear gas, flooding narrow streets, gunshots echoing as crowds scattered. The message was unmistakable silence. Online would be matched with silence on the ground. From a political analysis perspective, this is the classic two-front strategy of authoritarian management. 1. Shut down the channels of documentation. Deploy force before the world can watch. It is not chaos, it is choreography. Yet what stands out in Tanzania's case is the sheer speed of repression. The police response was not reactive. It was prepared, as if anticipating that the blackout alone would not pacify a population accustomed to skepticism. Here, state power was not trying to maintain order. It was trying to maintain narrative superiority. From my perspective, the violence reveals a deeper weakness within the establishment. A government confident in its legitimacy does not fear cameras. A government that lashes out at voters is a government negotiating with its own insecurity. And so, as tear gas clouds drifted over ballot boxes and voters fled the stations, meant to protect their voice, one truth became clear. When a nation is forced to choose between fear and truth, the streets become the only newsroom left. Tanzania's crisis was no longer just political. It was existential, a fight to keep democracy breathing under a chokehold. When the government severed Tanzania's connection to the world, it expected compliance. Instead, it ignited a counterforce it could neither predict nor contain, a digital underground built not by activists or elites, but by ordinary young Tanzanians who refused to be erased. Even as 90% of the internet collapsed, pockets of resistance found oxygen. Students in Dar es Salaam routed traffic through VPN chains, switching locations every few minutes to dodge government filters. Tech collectives reactivated mesh networks, phone-to-phone wireless webs that bypassed national providers entirely. Encrypted messaging apps like Signal and Briar surged, creating silent corridors of communication beneath the blackout. If the streets were the visible front of resistance, the networks were the invisible one. Together, they turned what was meant to be a controlled blackout into a hybrid uprising, half physical, half digital. What stands out in Tanzania's generation is not anger, but literacy, the instinctive fluency with technology that makes censorship look outdated. These are citizens who grew up with smartphones, who understand that information does not die when a switch is flipped. It mutates, it reroutes, it finds new exits. From my perspective, this is where the government miscalculated most. You can intimidate a crowd. You cannot intimidate an algorithm. You can shut down national providers. You cannot shut down an entire generation's knowledge of how the internet works. The lesson is clear. In the 21st century, the blackout is no longer the end of the story. It is the beginning of resistance. And on 23rd of October, Tanzanian youth proved that when the state tries to silence a nation, the nation answers, not with whispers, but with bandwidth smuggled through the cracks. While Tanzania was engulfed in chaos, one leader outside its borders was watching with unusual intensity: Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. For him, the blackout was not just a Tanzanian problem. It was a continental siren, a warning that Africa was entering a new era where elections were shaped not by ballots, but by bandwidth. From Ouagadougou, Traoré issued a stark message during a closed-door briefing. When a government fears its people, it cuts the internet. When a continent fears losing its freedom, it must answer. His perspective is shaped by history. Across the continent, digital repression has become the modern version of coup d'etat. Uganda, 2021 total, shutdown during elections. Gabon, 2016 internet cut, as violence escalated. Zimbabwe, 2019 social media, banned amid protests. Togo, 2020, communications throttled at polling stations. The pattern is undeniable. When institutions feel threatened, they no longer send tanks to the parliament. They disconnect the routers. From my analysis, Traoré sees Tanzania not as an isolated incident, but as the front line of a continental struggle. The fight for digital sovereignty, the right of African citizens to speak, organize and document reality without state interference. And he understands the stakes. A continent without control over its own digital infrastructure is a continent still colonized, not by flags, but by firewalls, not by armies, but by algorithms. In this sense, Tanzania is not just a national crisis, it is Africa's alarm bell, and Traoré is one of the few leaders willing to say it out loud. Because in the age of information, silence is not neutral. Silence is a weapon. If the streets revealed the violence, the data revealed the strategy. As Dar es Salaam burned organizations like NetBlocks, released graphs showing a near-vertical collapse in national bandwidth, a digital freefall that matched the timeline of the electoral confrontation with surgical precision. Within 24 hours, Twitter logged over 5 million crisis-related posts, most coming from outside Tanzania, amplified by diaspora networks and regional activists. TikTok saw thousands of re-uploads of smuggled footage. WhatsApp groups across East Africa lit up with encrypted voice notes, warnings, witness accounts, names of the injured. This is the anatomy of a modern digital coup. 1. Cut information at the source. 2. Control the physical space. 3. Dominate the narrative vacuum. But Tanzania miscalculated the fourth, newer variable. 4. The diaspora's ability to weaponize visibility. Economically, the blackout inflicted staggering damage. E-commerce transactions vanished, supply chains stalled, and financial platforms froze mid-operation. Analysts estimate losses reaching hundreds of millions of dollars, a price not paid by the government, but by ordinary citizens and local businesses. From a strategic perspective, this is where the government's logic collapses. An authoritarian blackout is designed to preserve stability, yet it destroys the very economic ecosystem that modern stability depends on. It is the 20th century playbook executed in a 21st century world, outdated, costly, and globally visible. My position is clear. You can kill a live stream, but you cannot kill the mathematics of data. Bandwidth graphs don't lie. They don't take orders. They don't respect political narratives. In Tanzania's case, the blackout became evidence, a statistical fingerprint of repression. And ironically, the attempt to hide the truth made the truth louder. As the blackout dragged on and violence escalated, the human cost became undeniable. Human rights organizations reported over 40 deaths and hundreds of arrests within just a few days. Families searched hospitals and detention centers in silence, while state television continued broadcasting music, cooking shows, and patriotic slogans, a surreal contrast to the chaos unfolding outside. But what truly shifted the continent's mood was a leaked video. A Tanzanian minister, unknowingly recorded, admitted that security forces had used necessary pressure and force beyond protocol to quell the unrest. It was a crack in the state's narrative, a moment where propaganda lost its grip. The reaction across Africa was immediate and polarized. Some governments applauded the crackdown, framing it as maintaining national stability. These were states with their own histories of internet censorship and political control: Nigeria, Uganda, Rwanda. But a second camp, led by student movements in Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, called it what it was: the birth of a digital dictatorship. This divide mirrors the identity crisis of the continent itself. Should Africa prioritize order, even if that order silences its youth? Or should it prioritize freedom, even if that freedom destabilizes entrenched elites? From my perspective, the leaked video marked the turning point. It validated the protesters, undermined the government's moral authority, and ignited a regional wave of solidarity. Because once the truth leaks, even once it breaks the spine of censorship. And in that moment, Tanzania's struggle became bigger than Tanzania. It became a continental referendum on the future of democracy in the digital age. As October bled into November, the question haunting Tanzania was no longer what happened, but what comes next. Analysts, activists, and African leaders converged on the same conclusion. The nation now stands at a crossroads with three possible futures, each carrying its own risks and consequences. Scenario 1. Escalating repression. This is unfortunately the most likely. The government doubles down on censorship, arrests opposition leaders, and militarizes the capital. Internet cuts become routine tools of governance. Tanzania transforms into a digitally controlled state where silence is enforced through fear and firewalls. Scenario 2. Political opening and reform. Still possible, but slim. Under pressure from global watchdogs, regional blocs, and its own youth, the government may concede to reforms: independent electoral audits, restored connectivity, political dialogue. But reform requires humility, a trait rarely found in regimes that deploy blackouts as policy. Scenario 3. The revolt spreads across East Africa. The most explosive scenario. Universities in Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa already staged solidarity actions. If the Tanzanian youth sustain momentum, the uprising could inspire a pan-regional pro-democracy wave, challenging entrenched elites across East Africa. In all three futures, one figure quietly emerges as a pivot: Ibrahim Traoré. His vocal stance on digital sovereignty positions him as a potential rallying point for a new Pan-African movement that views information freedom as the bedrock of liberation. From my perspective, the core battle is not about Tanzania alone. It is about Africa's right to speak, to document, to exist digitally without repression. And the crisis has revealed a truth many leaders still fear. When they cut the internet, they do not cut the people, they cut the mask. The future of the continent's democracy will not be written in ballot boxes alone. It will be written in bandwidth encryption and the unbroken will of its youth.